Okay, let's get right into it. Welcome everyone to this detailed explainer. Today we are going to unpack a deeply moving and honestly incredibly triumphant story of resilience, strategy, and just pure entrepreneurial brilliance. We're diving into the life of Shazia Kaiser. Now, this isn't just a standard biography, it's a profound case study. It shows how societal expectations can systematically strip a person of their agency, and more importantly, how you can methodically take that power back and become a true innovator. So get ready, because the way Shazia goes from being labeled a literal burden to creating a completely unique business model is something we can all learn a ton from.
To really understand Shazia's drive, we have to start with this emotional hook. As a young girl, Shazia was in a school play where she had to deliver a specific line. "Father, so what if I'm a girl? Couldn't I study?" Later on, she recalled just how intensely she related to those words. That single question perfectly captures the systemic, patriarchal myths she was forced to fight right from day one. I mean, it wasn't just a line in a script for her, it was the silent plea of her entire early life, perfectly summing up the massive barriers she faced simply because of her gender.
So let's move into section 1, the burden of being born. We'll look at the myths of a patriarchal childhood. Consider the stark, honestly heartbreaking hypocrisy of her early years. When it came time for school admissions, Shazia actually cracked the entrance exam, while her brother didn't. You'd think the logical next step would be to celebrate and enroll her, right? Well, instead, her father flat out denied her admission. His reasoning? Simply because she was a girl. And to make matters worse, in that very same breath, he declared that if her brother wanted to study, he would gladly send him to a foreign country. So it wasn't a lack of money, It was purely a restrictive mindset that told Shazia she just wasn't worthy of investment.
And this deep feeling of unworthiness started even earlier than that, because both her parents were working and struggling to balance 5 kids. Shazia was sent away to live with her grandparents in Dumka, Jharkhand. Despite having living, capable parents, she described feeling like an orphan. Just imagine watching other kids interact lovingly with their parents. It made her acutely aware of her own isolation. This physical separation made her severely introverted, and it planted this deep, painful seed that she was merely a burden to be managed, rather than a child to be nurtured.
That brings us to section 2, an illusion of marriage, losing control to societal expectations.
Tracking her life through its different stages, you can see how control was systematically stripped from Shazia at almost every developmental milestone. First, she was sent away in childhood. Then, as a teenager, she was placed in a hostel with walls she actually described as feeling like a jail. Moving into early adulthood, despite desperately wanting to study further, her father forced her into a local physiotherapy course purely to secure a good marriage match. Finally, in adulthood, she was married off into a highly orthodox family. Her father didn't even bother to properly research the family, he just saw an opportunity to finally wash his hands of the burden of a daughter.
And guys, this was the breaking point. When Shazia arrived at her in-laws' home, the ground basically slipped from beneath her feet. Remember that hospital her father thought her husband owned? Yeah, it actually belonged to his older brother. There was absolutely zero scope for her physiotherapy career. Her dreams were crushed before they even got off the ground. But the real tragedy is when she went back to her father to tell him what happened. His response? He simply told her, "This is your destiny." Instead of taking an ounce of responsibility for forcing her into an unresearched marriage, he just blamed her fate.
Let's look at section 3, taking back control, a methodical rise to independence.
Now, this is the pivotal moment. Standing there, facing her father's refusal to help, Shazia officially rejected his narrative of victimhood. She decided right then and there that she was claiming total agency over her future. She figured if things went wrong from here on out, it would be her own responsibility, not the fault of someone else's bad decisions or some predetermined destiny. She essentially took the pen and decided to write the next chapter all by herself.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how strategic she was. She didn't just blindly rebel, she was smart about it. She realized that to chase her own dreams in such a traditional society, she first needed stability and her family's confidence. So step 1, she took a job and used her earnings to quietly fund her husband's further education. Step 2, he graduated and secured a stable government job. Once her husband's career was set and the family was financially secure, she moved to step 3, turning the focus right back to her own dreams. Talk about a masterclass in methodical planning.
Moving on to section 4, empowerment through true knowledge. Breaking myths with religious text.
With her family life stabilized, Shazia actually secured a great job at UNICEF. But then, one day, after coming home from work, Her young son looked up at her and said, "Mom, when I come home, I feel like I have no one." Wow. Hearing those words was an absolute gut punch. It perfectly echoed her own childhood trauma of feeling like an orphan despite having working parents. She realized, to her horror, that she was repeating the exact same cycle her own mother had gone through. She desperately needed a solution where she could keep her ambitions without sacrificing her presence in her kids' lives.
She knew she couldn't just give up and become a traditional housewife, but keeping those rigid corporate hours was breaking her family. So looking for guidance, she turned to her religion, reading the Quran with proper translations for the very first time. And what she found was a massive paradigm shift. She discovered that true knowledge actually championed women's empowerment. She learned about tijarat, or business, and realized that Khadija, the very first Muslim woman, was a highly successful businesswoman. Business would allow her the flexibility to control her own time, care for her children, and build a real career. The whole societal myth that her religion restricted her completely shattered.
Which leads us to Section 5, Building a Unique Business, Finding the Gap in the Market.
Empowered by this newfound knowledge and armed with her family's blessing, Shazia took action. But she was determined to do things her own way. You know, when women in her society thought about starting a business, they were usually pushed into very specific, stereotyped boxes. But notice her strict criteria here. No boutiques, no stitching centers, no beauty parlors. She explicitly rejected these expectations. She wanted to prove once and for all that courage, innovation, and business acumen have absolutely no gender. She set a goal for herself. Start from absolute zero and find a market gap that no one else was even looking at.
Through intense research and keen observation, she stumbled upon a massive, completely untouched gap in the market. Here was her aha moment. She realized that almost every consumer product you buy out there, electronics, cars, home appliances, they all have a dedicated service center. But footwear? There was no professional, standardized service center for shoes.
And from that brilliant insight, her business was born, Revival Laundry, a dedicated footwear service center. She took a huge leap of faith, starting a company in an industry that basically didn't even exist in her local market. She had to build the operational models, the service standards, and the marketing strategies completely from scratch.
So, the crucial point is really understanding the scale of what she built. Over 10,000, that is the number of customers Shazia's innovative service has successfully served. It's just phenomenal.
Let's step back and look at the full reality of her success. Not only has she served over 10,000 customers, but her unique business model actually gained official recognition from both state and central governments in India. Today, she isn't just running a single shop. She is actively expanding, training other people, and opening operations in entirely new states. Just contrast this massive, tangible success with that early societal label forced upon her, that she was just a burden to be married off. She literally rewrote her entire value in the world.
And that brings us to this incredibly powerful thematic bookend to her story. Being a woman is not our weakness, it is our biggest strength. Shazia Kaiser didn't just say these words, she lived them. She used her unique experiences, her deep empathy as a mother, and her sharp intellect to navigate a world that tried to hold her back at literally every turn. She transformed her greatest perceived vulnerability into the very engine of her phenomenal success.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to ponder. How many incredible dreams, how many potentially revolutionary business ideas are being crushed right at this very moment simply because of outdated gender stereotypes? Shazia's story is a massive triumph, for sure, but it's also a stark reminder of the untapped potential hidden behind societal myths. It challenges all of us to look at our own biases and ask, who are we holding back, and what could they achieve if we simply let them study, work, and lead? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Think about that question, and I will see you next time.